Kyle Larson makes his case to fans, to NASCAR, and to potential sponsors and race teams. Meanwhile, NASCAR threatens to change superspeedway racing because drivers are crashing too much. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric, and welcome to Out of the Groove. I hope your week is off to a good start. I took yesterday off sort of to recoup after an emotional Talladega weekend, a weekend that saw races on Saturday and Sunday and in some form of controversy. I needed to slow down a little bit after that one. We are going to talk a little bit more about Talladega later on in this episode, but the big story to start this week, and actually this was revealed first Sunday afternoon, Kyle Larson, who of course has been suspended from NASCAR since April, put out a letter, I guess, or a blog post. I don't really know what you're supposed to call it, but Kyle Larson posted an emotional essay to his website, KyleLarsonRacing.com, Sunday. And over the last 48 hours or so, many people have read it, many people have reacted to it, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what was said in that note. But more importantly, I want to talk about what this might mean for his racing, and more specifically, his NASCAR future. I'm not going to read the entire essay on the show here today because it is pretty long, but it's available again, KyleLarsonRacing.com. It's there. I am going to read a few of the, I would say, more noteworthy statements, in my opinion, from that essay. Kyle Larson titled it, "My Lessons Learned." Throughout this essay, Larson expresses severe remorse for the mistake he made in April. Of course, you remember he used a racial slur during an iRacing broadcast. He didn't realize what he was saying was going out publicly. He thought he was speaking to someone on a private channel, but it was broadcast publicly. Of course, he was fired by Chip Ganassi Racing after McDonald's and Credit One and many of his sponsors left him. He's been in the dirt racing world for the last several months, tearing it up, having an all-time great season, but he wants to get back in NASCAR. So throughout this essay, he's expressing plenty of remorse. This is really his first public proclamation of the many things he's done since he was suspended. Ever since he was suspended, he's deleted all social media. He's been very quiet, outside of the dirt racetrack at least. He begins the essay talking about some time he spent in Philadelphia at the Urban Youth Racing School, which we talked about earlier this week. He reportedly attended a meeting at the Urban Youth Racing School with Steve Phelps, president of NASCAR, and Jim Campbell, one of the heads of Chevrolet. But he talks about much earlier in the summer going to that school, a school he's been a part of for several years. He's appeared there multiple times for multiple events. He's, of course, a graduate of the NASCAR Drive for Diversity program himself. But Larson talks about how important it was to him to apologize in person to many of the people at the Urban Youth Racing School that he's come to know over the years. Larson also in this letter talks about how he disappointed his parents. He mentions, of course, that his mom is Japanese and that his grandparents actually spent time in an internment camp during World War II. But what really sets this essay off is Larson saying that he felt he needed to take control of the situation. So here's some of the things he had to say. "Since April, I've done a lot of reflecting. I realized how little I really knew about the African-American experience in this country and racism in general. Educating myself was something I should have done a long time ago because it would have made me a better person. The kind of person who doesn't casually throw around an awful racist word. The kind who makes an effort to understand the hate and oppression it symbolizes and the depth of pain it caused black people throughout history, and still to this day. It was past time for me to shut up, listen, and learn." Larson, about midway through this, also mentions NASCAR's decision, and here's what he said about that. "NASCAR has a zero-tolerance policy on this type of behavior. When they suspended me, I received a plan that started with mandatory sensitivity training and went from there. I'm in regular contact with them, and I've learned and grown as I've gone through the program. I hope to race in NASCAR again." That's been reported for several months now that Larson would like to get back to NASCAR, but they're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. Larson, as we talked about last week, has been in contact with President Steve Phelps. He has been in contact with some of the drivers, it sounds like we'll talk about in a minute, but Kyle Larson obviously does want to get back in NASCAR. We've known for years that perhaps his greatest racing passion is dirt racing, but the spotlight that is the NASCAR Cup Series, I'm sure, is still a huge draw to Kyle Larson, and he says it right there, he wants to come back. But Larson says more in this essay. He talks a lot about, how he felt being, the way he puts it, publicly humiliated. "Being labeled a racist has hurt the most, but I brought that on myself. What I didn't expect, though, were all the people who, despite their disappointment in what I did, made the choice to not give up on me. It motivates me to repay their faith by working harder, not giving up on myself, and making sure something positive comes from the harm I've caused." Again, I'm not reading every paragraph, every line. There are details I'm leaving out here, but if you want to read the full thing, again, it's at KyleLarsonRacing.com, so I encourage you to do so. Towards the end of this piece, Larson actually talks about the effect this likely will have on his young kids when they get older. Larson, of course, has 2 kids, but they're very young. How old is Owen? Is he like 4 or 5? I'm not sure exactly how old he is, but very young, needless to say. But here's what Larson had to say about that, disappointing them. He says, "I want them to know that words do matter. Apologizing for your mistakes matters. Accountability matters. Forgiveness matters. Treating others with respect matters. I will not stop listening and learning, but for me now, it's about action, doing the right things, being a part of the solution, and writing a new chapter that my children will be proud to read." I know I've glossed over a lot of things in this essay, but Larson does talk about things we have mentioned on this show, how back in May he volunteered at a food drive in Minneapolis, and then after the George Floyd instance, he returned to Minneapolis and did more work there as well. Larson also names many black athletes that he's been in contact with over the last several months, including several race car drivers, Bubba Wallace, Willie T. Ribbs, J.R. Todd, and one of the more interesting parts of that essay is when Larson talks about talking to one of his longtime crew members, Mike Metcalf, and how difficult that conversation was to have. But in a nutshell, that is the lengthy letter essay that Kyle Larson posted to his website Sunday afternoon. For what it's worth, many within the industry reacted to Larson's statements. Perhaps notably, Bubba Wallace tweeted that he is proud of Kyle Larson after reading that piece. It's difficult. As I've said from the very beginning, everyone had different reactions and was affected differently by what Kyle Larson did in April. So everyone's going to react differently to this essay. I've said it since the beginning. I think Kyle Larson very likely is going to end up in NASCAR probably sooner rather than later. It consistently looks like 2021 he will be back more than likely full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series. I know I've spoken to many people who really didn't like what Kyle Larson said and lost a lot of respect for Larson after the mistake he made in April, and they all believe Kyle Larson deserves a second chance in NASCAR. But again, everyone's gonna have a different opinion on that. I think for me personally, as someone here on YouTube who talks about racing, I feel like I should focus on what is the most realistic course of action going forward, because we can talk all about whether or not Kyle Larson should or should not be reinstated to NASCAR. The truth is he is going to be reinstated into NASCAR, I would say, before the 2021 season starts. Now, per reports, even after this essay came out, Larson has still not formally applied for reinstatement into NASCAR. But personally, I believe it's a matter of not if, but when NASCAR decides the right time is to make that announcement. NASCAR, I think, knows the moment they reinstate Kyle Larson, it's going to be a day where a lot of the headlines read, driver who used racial slur is allowed back in NASCAR, and that may not be great PR for NASCAR. It's probably not the PR they're looking for. I don't think NASCAR really wants to be associated with that incident from April as more than they have to be. So I think NASCAR is really just waiting for the right time to formally make that announcement. Kyle Larson as well, for that matter. But again, I don't think it's a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when they make that announcement. As far as who might sign Kyle Larson in 2021, recent rumors continue to say Hendrick Motorsports would like to sign Larson to replace Jimmy Johnson next year. We also know Tony Stewart, about a month or so ago, publicly called on NASCAR to reinstate Kyle Larson, so maybe there's an opportunity one day for him at SHR. I don't want to sound like a cynic, because I think pretty much everything Kyle Larson says in that essay, if not all of it, is genuine. I truly believe that. But perhaps the timing of this essay is noteworthy. Perhaps this is leading up to some sort of announcement fairly soon. And like I said at the beginning of this episode, you know, if Rick Hendrick is really having those conversations with Chevy or with maybe some of the Hendrick Motorsports sponsors about trying to get them to allow Larson to drive for the team, perhaps an essay like this is exactly what Rick Hendrick needs to point those sponsors to say, look, this guy's not going to make another terrible mistake again that your brand will be associated with. You can trust him now. Look at this essay. I don't want to be a cynic. I really don't want to. I'm usually very optimistic and I give people the benefit of the doubt more often than not, but I do think the timing of this could be meaningful in some way. That isn't to say Larson's statement is not genuine. I very much believe that it is. There's that article by Jenna Fryer over the summer that echoed a lot of the same things Larson says in this piece right here and offers a lot of the same sentiment. So I truly believe that this is legitimate, but the question I'm looking at is, where does Larson end up in 2021? How does that affect the rest of NASCAR as a whole? And right now, I still think it's very likely he ends up in the 48 car next year, but announcement could be coming sooner rather than later. That's what I sort of take away from this statement, from this essay. But I don't know. Let me know what you all think. Do you think Kyle Larson will race again next year? Do you think Hendrick's the likely option? Do you think he could end up with a different team? Do you think he'll even be in the Cup Series next season? Should Kyle Larson want to come back Cup racing? Yeah, there's a lot of money in Cup, but boy, he seems to be having the time of his life on dirt and putting up results that absolutely out of this world. So should Kyle Larson even come back to NASCAR? Let me know what you guys think of all this down in the comments below. Now, continuing on silly season rumors, both Matt DiBenedetto and Eric Jones actually spoke to the media this morning about their uncertain 2021 plans, and I'll just touch on this really quick. Eric Jones told Matt Mayer from CBS that he hopes a deal with a new team might come together in the next couple of weeks, but he still doesn't have anything specific to share. Eric Jones, for a while, was linked to Hendrick Motorsports. Those rumors continue to kind of be muffled out at this point, so I have a feeling Eric Jones is going to end up getting a slight equipment downgrade from his last few years at Joe Gibbs Racing, so that's unfortunate for Jones, but hopefully he lands lands in a full-time Cup ride next year. I still think that's very likely. Might hear an announcement here in the next few days or a couple of weeks. Matt DiBenedetto was on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. Remember, September 30th was supposed to be the deadline for Wood Brothers Racing to announce whether or not they would keep DiBenedetto for another year, or if he was going to be let go. That day has come and gone, and we still have heard nothing from Wood Brothers. We still heard nothing from Matt DiBenedetto until now, and Matt DiBenedetto sort of had this to say.
I should find out this week. You know, it's nothing about, there's no like negotiations or nothing about pay or anything like that. You know, I'm just happy to be driving no matter what. It's basically just kind of sitting, waiting for all those groups to come together, talk, and hopefully come up with a decision. I'm hoping maybe this week, but they know how badly I want to continue driving this thing. And I've told them many, many times that we have a lot of races to win together and hopefully a big future together. So I'm hoping.
So it sounds like Wood Brothers Racing is still very much an option. Matt DiBenedetto points out that there are a lot of people involved. You know, not only are Wood Brothers involved in making this discussion, as well as sponsors like Menards and Motorcraft and Ford, but also Team Penske, who has a very strong alliance with Wood Brothers Racing. Team Penske, it sounds like, has very much to do with this decision, as Wood Brothers do, or as Matt DiBenedetto does. But DiBenedetto makes it very clear he wants to return to the 21 car next year. If I were a betting man, I'd still probably bet against him returning to the 21 next year. I just feel like every day that goes by, it becomes less and less likely, but who knows? Matt DiBenedetto, of course, turned a bunch of heads once again at Daytona this past weekend when he came this close to getting his first career win, and of course gave that very powerful, emotional interview on pit road afterwards. He's a fan favorite, and you know, hopefully a sponsor sees that and is willing to take a risk, to make an investment in Matt DiBenedetto, because that may be what it takes at this point for him to stay in the 21 car. And maybe Wood Brothers, maybe Penske, maybe they're waiting it out as long as they can to see if something materializes, because I'm sure they'd like to keep Matt DiBenedetto in that ride, but if not, they got Austin Cindric having a career year in the Xfinity Series, waiting for an opportunity. So we'll see what happens to Matt DiBenedetto. We might have more to talk about as far as silly season is concerned here in the next couple of days. All right, but the last thing I want to talk about in this episode, I saw this article from NBC Sports. Well, I guess it's from Sirius XM NASCAR Radio, because after the Talladega race on Sunday, which saw, I believe, 13 cautions, a lot of big wrecks, NASCAR VP of Competition Scott Miller indicated that changes to superspeedway racing may be coming in an attempt to limit the number of cars being wrecked on a regular basis at these tracks. Here's what he had to say. I feel like we're tearing up too much equipment. It's super easy for them to be aggressive out there in those tight quarters. It's hurt the show a little bit. So we have to get back to a little bit more calculated moves than just watching in the mirror and hanging a left. We have to get back there somehow. He also said, the aggression has just gone way up on super speedways. We have to kind of get our arms back around that a little bit. I saw on Twitter a lot of people had different reactions to some of those quotes, and I tweeted a little bit as well, but personally, I don't really like what I'm hearing here. I don't really feel like this is NASCAR's place to step in and police how aggressive the drivers are racing. Because when he says we need to get our arms around that a little bit, when he says guys can't just be blocking out the mirror all day long, like what is he actually suggesting NASCAR changed? Does he just want to change the rules package? Because that I guess you could do, and maybe go to a rules package that doesn't allow drivers to get those same crazy runs or allow them to bump draft as frequently. I mean, you could do that. I personally would hate to see that, because I think the super speedway package we've seen for the last year and a half or so has been absolutely phenomenal. It's created some fantastic racing. Yes, it's created some big wrecks, but we always see big wrecks at Talladega. But man, the racing has been so good. The passing throughout the field, the battles for the lead, it's been fantastic. I think it's been the best super speedway racing, definitely in the Gen 6 era, the last year and a half. So I'd hate to see them change the whole aero package, but I guess they could. But that doesn't really sound like that's what Scott Miller's saying. It sounds like he's talking about maybe rule changes, and I do not like the sound of that. The last thing after this Talladega weekend we all need is NASCAR to make more judgment calls on a regular basis. Like, what are some of the rule changes NASCAR could consider in this case? A lot of people are saying NASCAR should just get rid of the double yellow line rule. I mean, I guess they could, but that's certainly not gonna lower the number of crashes. More than likely, that might, if anything, increase the number of crashes. So that can't be it. Are they gonna make more rules around like locking bumpers and bump drafting? That's gonna be really difficult to enforce, because like in the Xfinity Series, they have a rule against locking bumpers. But even this week, if you look, when it comes down to 2 laps to go overtime, they're locking bumpers at least a little bit. It's very close. They push the issue on that rule at the end of those Xfinity races every single year. So again, it's a judgment call that we've seen called sometimes, and we've seen go no called other times. So it's another frustrating judgment call that NASCAR fans certainly don't want to see more of. What else could NASCAR do? Could they make an actual rule around blocking? Like in IndyCar, you know, there's rules at some of the ovals in IndyCar that you can't like look out the mirror and make a reactionary block if someone has a run on you, because that's dangerous. IndyCar cars are dangerous. Like in Indianapolis Motor speedway, those wrecks are scary, so they don't want people making aggressive blocks like that. NASCAR has been all about blocking, historically speaking, but is Scott Miller suggesting NASCAR is going to introduce a blocking penalty? I mean, there's already the penalty if you block someone below the yellow line, which came into play Sunday afternoon, which I think is a fair penalty, but just blocking in general, blocking within the boundaries of the racetrack, I think if you try to make that a penalty, if you try to make that a judgment call, did someone block too aggressively? Oh, you're just opening up a whole can of worms as far as controversial calls and ways to piss off fans. So that's a big fat no to any idea of a blocking penalty beyond just blocking someone below the WO line, because at least that's somewhat easy to enforce. I say that and I think they got it wrong Sunday, so I don't know, even that, oof. If you're riding next to somebody and they just put them all the way in the grass and wreck them, sure, that should be a penalty. That's traditionally has been a penalty. Like NASCAR at least has a limit that if you cross it, NASCAR will step in, but that's not what we've been seeing in super speedways. We're not seeing guys get angry at each other and wreck each other. We're just seeing aggressive blocks. We're seeing guys make tough moves and drivers make late blocks sometimes. Things happen fast at Talladega. I think every wreck has been genuinely accidental at this point. There's been no malice behind any of these moves. So I just hate this idea that NASCAR feels they need to police the best stock car drivers in the world. I mean, because that's what this is supposed to be. NASCAR is supposed to be the best stock car drivers on the planet. And if they can't make clean blocks, if they can't not wreck each other 12 times a race, that's on the drivers themselves, and if you want, the owners who hire them. I don't know, when I hear Scott Miller and them say that, I just think it's silly. I mean, if you do want to blame NASCAR for any of this thing, NASCAR is the one who created a playoff format that values winning more than any other playoff format in NASCAR history, so wins matter more. That ups the intensity. You put Talladega in the playoffs, in the middle of the playoffs, that's going to up the intensity. I think it's silly for NASCAR to now step back and say, oh, we don't like how aggressive the drivers are being. I don't know what you want. I don't know, if you can't, keep from wrecking a million cars at Talladega, I just think that's, at some point, it's just on the drivers, It's, you look at some of these blocks, like Matt DiBenedetto trying to block William Byron at the end of yesterday's race, or Sunday's race. I mean, that's just a bad block. I could see it coming a mile away. I was like, don't do it, Matt, don't do it. He did it anyways, and he got a penalty for it. Bubba Wallace trying to block Ryan Preece late in the race, caused a big wreck. It was just a bad block. I'm just, well, what are you doing, Bubba? Hold your line up. He caused a wreck. I saw that coming a mile away. Clint Bowyer running all over the back end of Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy saves it, and then keeps riding, and then 3 seconds later, Bowyer keeps it, and I'm like, Clint Bowyer, what are you doing there? That was all in Clint Bowyer. That was just bad driving. So most of the wrecks I think we see at Talladega are just clear driver error. And I would expect more from the best stock car drivers in the world. And I think NASCAR should as well. They shouldn't feel they need to hold NASCAR drivers' hands through Daytona and Talladega. But that's just me. I thought that was, I just think it was a bad statement. Because again, what do they change? So they change the whole rules package, fine. But I don't want to see a rule against blocking. That's just, ooh, that will be bad news. Anyway, that's all I've got for today's episode. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new. As always, a huge thank you to my tremendous Patreon supporters. If you also want to support the show, you can check out that top link down in the description. I greatly appreciate it. Got a busy week of videos. Might have some guests on the channel later in the week. And then, of course, the Charlotte Roval is Sunday. Going to be a lot to talk about between now and then. Thank you all for watching. I will see you again very, very soon.